Hello, beautiful people. This is Jennifer Kenny. Today I'm here to talk to you about how to apply leadership skills in the workplace. If you think you need a title to lead, you don't. The best leaders don't command, they clarify, they observe, and they create value. Leadership starts with what you practice, not what you say, or not what your title is. And you're leading every single time you make a meaningful offer. By the end of this video, I want to help you be able to see how to shift from problem solving to value creating. I want to introduce you to the 6-step practice model and show you how you can use that to apply your leadership skills in the workplace. And I want you to know how to be able to apply leadership skills at any level and in any role. I run programs for leaders and innovators, and they aren't training programs. They are most definitely seriously applied programs focused on very specific project outcomes and very specific organizational and corporate wins. So when we think about applying leadership skills, I'm all about the application. If I'm teaching you something that you can't apply, then to me, it's not as valuable as it could be. So my focus is entirely on application. And as such, it is also entirely on practices. Practices that you can put into place starting as soon as you finish watching this video. In my book, The Innovation Mindset, I introduce you to the 6-step practice model. And the 6-step practice model is helping you begin to think about your leadership skills and your leadership actions as day-to-day practices that you are going to build on. The 6-step practice model is designed to help you build practices that you are going to distinguish, observe, and then put into action immediately. I'm hoping this video will help you begin to distinguish what some of those practices are for yourself. So if you're watching this, really great time to take out your tablet and begin to start thinking about, if I was to think about leadership as a practice, what would I consider to be great practices in leadership? If you want to drop some of that in the comments, let me know as well. But if you start thinking about leadership not as a bunch of skills that a particular human shows up with, but as practices that many human beings practice and can be identified as practicing and exhibit through the work that they do and the language that they use, what you'll start doing is you'll start beginning to identify for yourself, what does it mean for me to practice my leadership on a day-to-day basis? The 6-step practice model starts with observe. And the reason for that is we've been taught to think about leadership as embodied in a leader. And our society as a whole glorifies leadership. And we identify leaders as being incredible, amazing humans. We haven't really been taught how to think about those incredible, amazing humans as what is it that they're doing recurrently that I can observe and that I can maybe start to do for myself. If you start thinking about some of the great leaders, particularly some of the ones in tech like Steve Jobs at Apple and people like that, what you can do is you can begin to see that what Steve Jobs did on a recurring basis, one of the things that he did incredibly successfully and effectively on a recurring basis, was he had amazingly high standards for things. And he asked people to live up to those standards, sometimes apparently not very nicely. He asked people to live up to those standards on a pretty recurring basis. As you start observing leadership around you, because obviously Steve Jobs isn't here for you to observe, but as you start observing leadership around you in your organization, start beginning to think about what are some of the practices that I see people exhibiting that I would be proud to start exhibiting myself. So now we move away from the idea of leadership being primarily a skill and leadership being a practice that you can practice on a day-to-day basis. If you have 1 or 2 or 3 of those in your notepad or on your tablet right now, start thinking about where and when you might be able to practice those, where and when you might be able to apply those. One of the practices that I have found to be very valuable for people getting started with this thinking is the practice of making offers. I've talked about this in many of my other videos because it is a very important catalyst for us to build our leadership capacity. And the practice of making offers moves us away from the mode of simply doing what it is we're told to do or taking on tasks, and moves us into the mode of beginning to look at value and beginning to look at customers and beginning to build relationship and empathy and trust with those customers. Now, your customers don't have to be external customers to your company. They can be internal customers in your company. So your boss is one of your customers for a whole bunch of work that you do right now. If you think of your boss as your customer, then you start thinking about, how do I deliver satisfaction for my boss, for my customer, with this particular piece of work that I'm doing? If you do not know what it is going to deliver delight and satisfaction for your boss, then the chances are you're doing a bunch of busy work. If you're doing a bunch of busy work, you're not applying your leadership skills. Your leadership skills are what's going to prevent you from doing busy work and start having you shift to doing really valuable work. As you start thinking about the value that you want to add into your organization, which is, I think, one of the most important aspects of leadership, you will also start thinking about, how do you understand that value better? Who are the people who you need to have conversations with to understand how value is generated inside the company? What does it mean for value to be delivered? How is value measured? Who are the people who really have their eye on the ball when it comes to creating either products of value or services of value that come from your company? Once you start doing that, you're going to have what I refer to as conversations for co-invention. The 6-step practice model talks about this as being the 4th step. Once you move beyond practicing courage and you start applying your desire to be able to lead, you then move into the co-invention phase. The co-invention phase is when you recognize your own area of leadership and your own area of mastery, which is different than someone else's. So part of what happens to us when we start thinking about leadership, because we're looking at leadership and trying to observe it and trying to understand it and trying to enact it ourselves, we tend to genericize it. And instead, it would be much more useful for us to start thinking about it as my leadership, that person's leadership, my boss's leadership. They're all going to be slightly different. Once you start observing and distinguishing and applying courage to start practicing some of them, you start seeing leadership as a library of skills that you can begin to pull which ones you want. A library of skills that you can pull and practices you can put in place as you start practicing those new leadership skills. So as you start having those conversations, you're going to start co-inventing with other people who are also committed to the outcomes you are. Once you get into that game of co-invention, and again, I talk about that in another video, what you'll notice is that you now start creating knowledge both for yourself and for the company and for the people around you. You are well on your way then to leadership and to innovation. If you are working in a technical environment or you're working in any organization that requires innovation, which I would say is every single organization, if you're working in an innovation that requires innovation, then as you start building your 6-step practice model, you start moving yourself up that ladder of capability. And your final one is your ability to be able to build innovation capacity inside your organization. If you're a great leader, and if you're committed to being a great leader, your ability to be able to create innovation around you is going to be a huge determinant of your success. At the beginning of this video, I talked about you don't have to have a leadership title to be a leader. If you want to step into a leadership role, the most effective way to do that before that role is actually assigned to you is for you to start making offers. And I've talked about offers many times in this video and in previous ones. But what you'll also see in there is that that is the first step of leadership. So whenever I am looking to interview people, or I'm looking for, or I'm reviewing resumes, what I do is I look to see whether or not that person has made significant offers in their workplace and over their career. Leadership is all about making offers. Your CEO of your company is making offers to Wall Street and to their customer base and to all their other stakeholders on an ongoing basis. You can start with an absolute microcosm of that, which is you can design one offer to one internal customer inside your company, and that internal customer can be your boss. Once you get started on that process, you are now already demonstrating leadership skills. And you can also now begin to think about, what kind of leadership do I want to build above and beyond this simple first step that I have taken? So as you shift from simply taking tasks that are assigned to you, in other words, you're problem solving, based on someone else having identified the problem, to you being the person who identifies the problem and you make offers because you're adding value, you are now putting yourself in a leadership role. Once you do that enough times, you will be recognized as someone who is able to take high levels of responsibility, who is able to successfully execute, and who is able to lead. That is your entry point into building yourself as a leader and applying your leadership skills directly in the workplace. I have another video you should check out, which is how to effectively use both management and leadership skills in the workplace. Check it out, let me know what you think, and I wish you the best of luck as you apply your leadership skills in the workplace. Take care and thank you.